I hope that none of us ever reach the point that we take this for granted. And I hope all of us, from one first day to the next, will be reminded of just how important this is. To lift your lone voice and find your voice joined in a chorus with others. To pray together in the quietness of this place. To gather around this memorial which has called us to this place. And to remember why this is so important. What a joy it is. What a blessing it is for brothers and sisters to gather together here and in hundreds and thousands of other places around this world on the first day and do what we've just done today. And I want you to know how thrilled I am to be able to worship with you. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2. Bear one another's burdens and thereby fulfill the law of Christ. There's no secret that we live in a culture that is motivated by self. People get so self-centered and they become so self-absorbed and self-seeking, and they get caught up in their own self-importance and all of that kind of thing. I think social media probably feeds that more than anything else. This focus on self. Maybe it's best captured by a word that is new to our vernacular: selfies. I saw a meme the other day of the children of Israel coming through the Red Sea with Moses. And it was a picture of what it would be like if it were in the 21st century. They would have never got through. Because as this cartoon, as they're coming through, they're all taking selfies, you know. They've all got their cameras up and they're taking selfies of the water on both sides. They would have never made it. But that's our culture. And yet selfishness is the complete opposite of Jesus' discipleship. From the story he told about the Good Samaritan to the poverty-stricken widow, from the great commandment to love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself, and to the example of Jesus himself, who in Luke chapter 10 and verse 45 said, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give. Selflessness is the mark of the Jesus follower. He said in Luke 9 and verse 23, if any wish to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. I was at a place, and at the end of this assembly, the song leader got up and he said, we're going to lead one verse of one song, one verse of one final song, and then we'll have a prayer. And so we turned over there, and the song, you know the song, None of Self and All of Thee. The only problem was he led verse 1 of that song. And verse 1 says, all of self and none of thee. He didn't think that through, you know. So we sang all of self and none of thee, and we went home. Counterproductive. Each of these one another exhortations of Scripture helps us grasp this idea of selflessness. This isn't about me. Paul said, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but rather lift up your brother, lift up your sister. We can't fulfill any of these one another's as long as we're so self-focused, including this one: bear one another's burdens. Every one of us has certain points in our life in which we are just burdened Excessively. I sat down one day, this was 4 or 5 years ago. I sat down one day and I thought about the people who sit in the pew on a typical Sunday morning where I was at the time, and of the things that were going on in their lives or that had gone on in their lives. And I just made a list of some of the things that I knew about, many of which I didn't even know about. And I wrote a piece called The People in the Pew. And the people in the pew were these people. There are parents burdened beyond measure because of their prodigal children. There are grandparents raising their grandchildren because if they don't, who will? There are caregivers who wonder if anyone understands the burdens they face. There's a wife who watches helplessly as her spouse slowly passes away from her. There are single parents facing double duty and feeling like an outcast in a world of couples. There's a brother fighting the secret sin of addiction. There's a sister who battles depression. There's a young couple hoping for the blessing of a child only to get the news of disappointment again. There's a middle aged woman who has just recently become a Christian, but she lives with the emotional scar of an abortion that she would like to forget, but she cannot. There's a Vietnam War veteran, and he would like to forget some things, but he cannot. There's a Christian facing both his cancer and his fears. There are parents who have faced the awful and unnatural tragedy of burying a child. There's a brother and a sister who have watched their marriage dissolve and now live with the stigma of divorce. There are several widows who sit down every day as one at a table for two. There's a sister who harbors the awful secret of being a battered and abused wife. There's a step parent who always seems to be on the outside of the window looking in. There's a family of a special needs child. There's a couple who has learned that their son is a homosexual. There's another couple who visits their son in prison. And on and on and on. Somebody told me when I first started preaching, preach to broken hearts because there is one in every pew. That's not exactly true. The truth is, our pews are filled with them. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we ache in very deep places. And so we come to an assembly on a Sunday morning and we put the smile on our face, and somebody asks, "How are you?" And we give the standard, "Fine, I'm doing fine, doing great." But maybe that's not the case at all. Life is hard, and some days it gets harder. And the whole point in all of this is pretty simple. We need each other. We've got to have each other. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 9 and 10 says, two are better than one. For when one falls, the other will lift up his companion. But woe to the one who falls, and there is not anyone to lift him up. That's what Christians are for. Cain said it sarcastically when he asked, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Well, Cain, yes, you are. And so are you, and so am I. John said in 1 John chapter 3, whoever closes his heart against his brother, how does the love of God abide in him? I think that's kind of rhetorical. It doesn't. It doesn't. So it behooves us to look at Galatians 6 and verse 2 and understand what it means and understand the power of this one another command. Bear one another's burdens. Let me leave you with three things this morning about bearing burdens. The first thing I want to say is that there are times when each of us must bear our own burdens. I want you to look at verse 5 of Galatians 6, because verse 5 says, each one will bear his own burden. But verse 2 says, bear one another's burdens. Verse 5, well, bear your own burdens. Contradiction? No, because it's a different word. In verse 5, the word could be translated load or pack. Think backpack. It has to do in verse 5 with individual responsibilities and individual obligations that are non transferable. You can't take these and give them to somebody else. For example, nobody can believe on the Lord Jesus Christ for you. Nobody can make the decision to be baptized for you. Nobody can fulfill your family responsibilities for you. No one is going to be able to answer on the day of judgment for you. Romans chapter 14 and verse 12, we must all give account before him. So there are certain duties, there are certain obligations and responsibilities I can't give to you. You can't take from me. They are mine and mine alone, and yours alone. Each one of us have certain burdens, a certain pack that we carry that nobody can do for us. That's verse 5. Each one will bear his own burdens. But back to verse 2, secondly, he says we are to bear one another's burdens. That's a different word. The word here means heavy, heavy weight. It means that which presses you down. It's the kind of burden that you can't lift by yourself. It's too heavy. You ever seen a little kid, maybe a little boy, his dad's going on a trip and the dad's got his suitcase packed and the little boy wants to help his daddy so much and he's got a hold of his daddy's big suitcase and he's trying to carry it through the house and it's too heavy for him and he's lugging that thing around, hitting everything. It's obvious it's too heavy. He can't carry it. And so the dad reaches down and says, "Hey, son, let me help you with that. Let me lift that load." That's verse 2. We bear one another's burdens because some burdens are too heavy. Now, in the specific context of Galatians chapter 6, the burden he's talking about here is the burden of sin and restoration. You see that in verse 1. Brethren, even if anyone is caught in a trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such an one in a spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself, that you too will not be tempted. Is there a heavier, weightier burden than sin? Is there a way that I can help ease that burden? Well, I can't take it away, but I tell you what I can do. I can help bring you to the one who can. And Paul says there are 4 guidelines to this restoration process. He says, first of all, in verse 1, restoration is for the spiritually minded. Do you see that? Brethren, even if a man is caught in a trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such an one. There's 2 kinds of Jesus followers. There are the followers who wear his name, who live his name, and there are the followers who just fake it. It's all a facade, it's a charade. They talk the talk, but that's it. In 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 3, Paul addresses this group when he says, "You are still fleshly. You're acting so carnally." Here were people who had been baptized, but they'd never been converted. They'd been baptized, but they got wet. And so Paul says, look, restoration of brokenness in regard to this, he says, is for the spiritually minded. In Luke 6 and verse 39, he says, if the blind follows the blind, both of them are going to fall into the ditch. I had a blind brother one time. This was in Cincinnati. And he loved to lead singing. And one Sunday night they had a singing, or Wednesday night they had a singing, and he loved to participate in leading the singing. Of course, he was blind, and he had a Braille songbook. And this particular evening, he stood up in front of the congregation with his Braille book, and he got ready to lead the song, and he was feeling the words, feeling the song, and he got this funny glaze look on his face. And he said, "Oh no, I brought my cookbook." Oh, so the brethren helped him and he led the song anyway. But anyway, Jesus said, "You don't want to follow a blind man." He said, "Because the blind man doesn't know where he's going. And if you follow the blind man, you're not going to know where you're going either." So he says, look, restoration is for the spiritually inclined. Restoration is for the spiritually minded person who knows where he's going because he follows Jesus not only in word and name, but in life. Secondly, he says restoration is for the humble minded. You see it in verse 1. Restore such an one in a spirit of gentleness, humility. And then down in verse 3, he says, if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. You know, the way we approach somebody is just as important as anything we say. I'm convinced some people are never restored to the Lord because of the attitude of the one trying to do the restoring. What's the old saying? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Let me ask you a question. It's not a hard question. Can you sense when somebody is being arrogant? Can you sense when they have an air of superiority over you and they talk down to you and they look down? Can you sense that? I can. So if I come to you with a sin problem, or you come to me with a sin problem, and we're dealing with restoration, it better not be haughtiness. It better be humility. 2 Timothy 2 and verse 25, correcting with gentleness, Paul says in that passage. So restoration is for the humble minded. Third, he says restoration is for the cautious minded. He says in verse 1, you better watch yourself, be cautious. So don't try to restore somebody else. Don't try to counsel somebody else if you're struggling with the same thing they are. Don't try to counsel somebody else if you're tempted by what they're tempted with. Don't try to do this if you're not taking this seriously. Don't do it. He says, proceed with caution, verse 1, each one looking to himself. And fourth, Paul really doesn't deal with this here, but James does in James 5 and verse 16. Restoration is for the prayerfully minded. Confess your sins to one another and pray for one another. So when you start putting all of this together in Galatians chapter 6, the specific context of bear one another's burdens is reaching out to your brother or sister when there's a sin problem and you're seeking to restore them back to the Lord. But the application of bear one another's burdens goes beyond that. Here's one. When your brother or sister is in deep sorrow, to bear their burden means that you reach out and comfort them. Romans 12 and verse 15, we weep with those who weep. 1 Corinthians 12:26, here's a member and they're suffering. All of the members should suffer with him. I'm going to tell you something you don't already know. You know this. There are days that are going to knock you down to your knees. And you're going to get overwhelmed and you're going to get overloaded and you're going to get overstressed. And long days and longer nights, we've all had those. And we need to know, I am not alone. I am not alone. And it is more than the superficial greeting on a Sunday morning when somebody knows I'm going through some hard times or you're going through hard times. And we tend to say, listen, if there's anything I can do, let me know. Sometimes I think that ranks up there with that, let's do lunch. I'm not sure that's a lot. Not sure that has a lot of depth. Jesus in John 11 at the death of Lazarus, when he got word that Lazarus had died, he didn't send a message that says to Mary and Martha, if there's anything I can do, let me know. He went to them. He went to the grieving. He lifted their weight. He sat down and he cried with them. Well, I think we read those two words, Jesus wept, and we smile and we say, well, that's the shortest verse in the Bible. Got that one memorized. Jesus wept. Do we understand the power of those two words? Jesus broke down. Jesus loved Lazarus and Mary and Martha so much that when he got there and he saw their grief, he himself was filled with grief. He broke down. He cried with them. And that's what Jesus always did. He would step across the path of pain and he would cry with people. I had somebody say to me one time, I don't go to funerals because I don't know what to say. Really? Number one, is it that hard to tell somebody you love them and you're going to lift them up in prayer? Is it that hard? And number two, I'll tell you a little secret. They're not going to remember what you say anyway. But they are going to remember if you showed up. So show up. Because this kind of sorrow is a weight that is too heavy for you to carry by yourself. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I cringe. I cringe when I hear somebody say this, and I've heard it many times. God won't give you more than you can carry. I beg to differ. I think sometimes He will. And I think that's the whole point. There's some suffering, there's some burdens that are too heavy for you to carry. In 1 Peter 5 and verse 7, cast your anxiety upon the Lord. He will sustain you. Why would I need to do that if I can carry it? Psalm 55 and verse 22, cast your burdens on the Lord. Why would I need to cast burdens on the Lord? I can carry it. Matthew 11 and verse 28, come unto me all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Why would I need to do that? I can carry it. God may give you more than you can handle because He doesn't want you to handle it. He wants you to hand it over to Him. Isn't that the message of the Joseph story? Isn't that the message of the Job story? Have you never read what Paul said about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 8? 2 Corinthians 1 and verse 8, where Paul confesses, I had more than I could carry. I couldn't carry this. 2 Corinthians 1 8, for we do not want you to be unaware, brethren, of our affliction which came to us in Asia. Here it is. We were burdened excessively beyond our strength, so that we despaired even of life. Paul said, I couldn't carry that. It was too heavy. Now, invariably, somebody says, well, what about 1 Corinthians 10:13? Well, wait, 1 Corinthians 10:13. Well, okay, let's turn and read 1 Corinthians 10:13. 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man, and God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape also that you will be able to endure. I think that verse is talking about temptation. In fact, I think he says it 3 times in that verse. Temptation, tempted, temptation. And what he's telling us is Satan is chained. Satan is like a dog on a leash. He can only go so far. You can turn and walk away from him, but you can go over there and pet him if you want to. But if you go over there and pet him, he's going to bite the fire out of you. You don't have to do that. There's another way. There's a way of escape. You can go the other way. This verse is talking about temptation to sin. We're talking about life trials. We're talking about Joseph kind of stuff. We're talking about Job kind of stuff. We're talking about the kind of stuff that hits you hard and knocks you down and you don't know what to do. I think it's okay. I think it's okay to admit there are some things I can't handle. I just can't handle it. And I don't have to handle it because it's too heavy. The loss of a child is more than you can handle. Cancer is more than you can handle. Caregiving is more than you can handle. Spousal abuse and assault is more than you can handle. Prodigal kids are more than you can handle. The loss of a spouse is more than you can handle. And that's the whole point. Quit trying to carry what you cannot carry. When you see a brother or sister struggling and stumbling through the valley of the shadows of life, and they're trying to carry a weight that they cannot carry, love them enough to reach out and sit down and cry with them and sit down and be there for them and do whatever it takes to help lift their burden. That's what I think about when I read Galatians 6 and verse 2. Bear one another's burdens. Or maybe you're wrestling with a decision and you're not sure about, and it's a decision that's weighing you down. Or maybe you're just discouraged and it's heavy upon you. Or maybe there's a situation that is beyond your control and you feel like I'm drowning. Psalm 40 talks about sinking down into the muddy mire. And the point of Galatians 6 and verse 2, when we're sinking and we reach out a hand, we need to be the hand that grasps the hand of our brother and sister and help them get back on their feet. Bear one another's burdens. Bear your own pack, bear your own burden. There's some things you can't share. Bear one another's burdens because we all need each other. And third, there are some burdens that go beyond all of that. And that's why we are told, cast your burden upon the Lord. There's sometimes you just take it to Him and plead with Him and ask Him. And there may be times when God removes the burden. There may be times when God gives you the greater grace and the strength to bear it. But regardless, He will never leave you and He will never desert you. And what He will do is tell you through Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10, my grace is sufficient for you. I'm going to give you enough grace and I'm going to give you enough strength and I'm going to give you enough help that you're going to get through this. May God help us to see beyond ourselves. May God help us to look around and get beyond the superficial and see that we are a spiritual community of people who hurt and who struggle and whose burdens are just sometimes impossible for us to carry. Bear one another's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. Church isn't about me. Church is about Him. And church is about one another. May we never, ever forget that. We sing the song of invite this morning. If you're not a child of God and you're ready to put your Lord on in baptism for the remission of sins, nobody can do that for you. That's your obligation. That is your responsibility. But if we can help in some way because you're discouraged, because you're just knocked down, and you need prayers and you need help, and maybe you just need people to know you're struggling, it's okay. I think sometimes we take the invitation at the end of a service, and the invitation is for this group of people and this group of people, and that's it. No, the invitation of Jesus is for anyone who needs our strength and who needs our help. Because I think I've been around this group enough. You all genuinely love each other. I can see that. You can see that. And I guarantee you, you come before these people and you'll find the hand that reaches down to help lift you up. Let us pray for you this morning, if that's the case. Won't you come while we stand and sing together?